Let's get to the news. So first up today, we have the New York Times editorial board calling on Mayor Garland to indict President Trump if there is sufficient evidence for doing so. And so they put out this kind of article on Friday, basically saying, look, January 6th is the worst threat to democracy, and anything to kind of squell it or go after those who started it is justified. And so they say here, look, we know it's costly to go after President Trump in this way and indict him, but we should do it anyway. And so I'll start here. The board mentioned that former President Ford's pardon of former President Nixon for any crimes he committed during Watergate, with Ford justifying the decision as avoiding the rousing of ugly passions and polarization. So they're saying, hey, this is a good, this is how we were as a culture, half a century ago. We were, let's say, more amicable across the aisle. But they're saying, look, the board stated that prosecuting Trump could entrench support for him and play into the conspiracy theories he has sought to stoke. So they're acknowledging civil war could be stoked by this, and politically, the GOP would have more incentive going into the midterms. So they're acknowledging that this could actually be really damaging for them politically and non-politically, right, from a civil war standpoint. And they also argue here, hey, indicting Trump could allow future presidents to misuse the precedent to go after their political rivals. So they're acknowledging, hey, if we allow, Biden's DOJ to go after Trump, we can see that continuing to be a circle of vengeance, if you would, going forward politically, which is not good for the country. They say, despite all of that, right, but the paper warned that doing nothing poses a much more significant risk and not holding Trump, accountable for his actions related to January 6th, the insurrection, which could set an irresistible precedent for future presidents. So they're saying January 6th is the end-all, be-all. We should go after him with this DOJ indictment, which is interesting because, as far as we know, the FBI raid wasn't explicitly about January 6th, right? But for some reason, the New York Times here is saying, hey, we should go after him, even if we don't have a good case about, nuclear information or classified information and all that, and, legally speaking, just to punish him for January 6th, which is true to their narrative, which has been crazy, which is that January 6th was worse than 9/11, so they say. And according to Dick Cheney a couple weeks back, it's the worst. Donald Trump is the greatest threat to democracy. So we have basically, long story short here, more lunacy, right? More insanity from the left, from the New York Times, from the Dems, right? Sicking their, resources on their political rivals and justifying it. In this case, not on the basis of nuclear weapons, which they know is BS, but based upon, politics. And January 6th was so bad, even though, Trump got impeached twice and found basically not guilty, right, during that impeachment trial. They still want to go after him for that. And then the last thing that's interesting here is on Friday, obviously the affidavit came out trying to explain the justification for the Trump raid, the raid on Mar-a-Lago. It was almost entirely redacted, so nothing notable to say there. I just wanted to say they aligned the release of this story, the New York Times did, with the release of the affidavit. So it's interesting kind of timing here. Ultimately, I'm going to put this into A tier. We knew the indictment was coming. I already mentioned it. It's just a foregone conclusion. It's just a matter of when and on kind of what grounds, and then who would be calling for it. So interesting to see the New York Times editorial board basically moving forward in this direction and trying to urge Garland to act. And then next story, we have Mark Zuckerberg. So he had a show with Joe Rogan this past week. He basically said, look, FBI, they told me to be, watchful about, disinformation leading up to the election. And so what Facebook did is different from Twitter, which banned the Hunter Biden laptop story altogether. They basically throttled it effectively. So they limited its reach on Facebook. Zuckerberg could not go into like by what percentage, because Joe actually asked him like to what extent was it throttled on Facebook, but he basically says it was significant, right? So interesting development here. I would almost want to go back to like Sam Harris, who I mentioned the other week, and say, hey, you said illegal conspiracy is wrong, right? Like that's your moral standard. So what if we had the government basically illegally going after private companies and telling them what to do with their platform and how to go about censoring information on actual illegal grounds? Like, would that be condemnable? Are you going to come out and condemn Facebook for this, Sam Harris? And of course, the answer is no. Ultimately, I'm going to put this into the A category. We knew this was happening. I mean, the abundance or the evidence was super abundant. The only question is, to what extent and more or less in what way. When the FBI comes knocking on the door and says, hey, watch out for Russian disinformation or things that can influence the election, the code there is watch out for anything that could hurt the Democrats and Joe Biden. So ultimately A tier. Nice for him to basically admit it, but we kind of suspected as much, I think. Moving on to one of the big stories from this week. So we have the White House and Joe Biden basically coming out and forgiving $10,000 in federal student loan debt for millions of borrowers. So this is actually a big deal. I know on the campaign, Biden had talked about forgiving student loan debt. The Dems have like long talked about, doing something like this. In this case, it's being limited to $10,000. It seems to be in a lot of sticky ground, though. I kind of thought that there would be more celebration on the left for having reached this like milestone, quote unquote, that they've been working towards for so long. But I was surprised to see that there was actually not a lot of joy or happiness or celebrations. It was almost like, hey, step in the right direction, but my loans are hundreds of thousands of dollars. So what is $10,000 going to do, right? So those people don't really care. And then conversely, if let's say you had zero debt because you worked hard and paid it off, that now you feel a little salty because it's like, oh, I was incentivized to work hard and pay off my loans, and I didn't benefit from this. In fact, I'll be paying for this most likely, right? So there's an interesting video from a couple years ago of Elizabeth Warren being confronted by a voter saying, hey, I worked hard to pay off my daughter's student loans. Am I going to get my money back? My friends were out partying and traveling and, being irresponsible with their money. Am I going to get paid back? And Elizabeth is like, of course not. And she laughs in his face. So this video kind of went viral the other day. Just kind of like highlighting that tension. And to be honest, it's well-founded because not only is it more or less disincentivizing good behavior and good financial stewardship, let's say, but it's also really expensive. So there's some watchdogs out there who are saying that Biden's student loan plan is going to cost between $500 billion and $1 trillion. And then the White House came and said, well, $1 trillion is not really like in the ballpark. And I believe they came out with an estimate saying like it's going to be like $240 billion. So who knows what the exact number is going to be. Suffice to say, it's going to be hundreds of billions of dollars that people who did not take out debt irresponsibly are going to now be responsible for paying off, because it would be one thing. And I was thinking about this. I was trying to be fair. Like if it was just forgiveness of debt, like a part of me is like potentially okay with that. But apparently this is not necessarily a true forgiveness. This is more like debt redistribution, via inflation, maybe some taxes, etc. Maybe if not me and, my generation, those who come after, right? It's someone's going to be on the hook for this money is the reality of the situation. So through that lens, I'm actually quite concerned about this. And then not to mention the inflationary aspect of it, hundreds of billions of dollars being spent in this way. And now these broke college students or college graduates, I should say, are now in theory $10,000 richer, right? So if they've been irresponsible financially in the past, they may go out and spend that money, just like they did, with COOF relief, basically COVID relief. And so that's going to further drive potentially inflation, right? So you have like the double whammy of inflation impact here. So it's almost like Biden's agenda has been like, how can I cause record high inflation like every other week? Like I want to like push the limit as much as possible. So Ultimately, I'm going to give this one an S tier. I think it's the surprisingly negative reaction by the left, and the scrutiny that it's been getting has been somewhat interesting. And people are realizing now that, the budgets are tightening up, groceries are more expensive. Gas is still pretty expensive right now. Economy's not looking so good. Like, people are being more cognizant with the money. And they're like, man, I can see this coming back to bite me and bite us. But Joe Biden doesn't care. He's going to push his agenda and try to proverbially buy votes. But I think the net effect for this politically may actually potentially be negative for him instead of positive. So we'll see. So next thing, I have to give an update on Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate. So I mentioned this guy last week. Kind of in passing, mentioned that he got kicked off of Facebook and was it Instagram? But he was still on YouTube. He is no longer on the YouTube. He has gotten booted off of there as well, and that's actually a big deal because video content is his big like money maker, I think. And then even though he wasn't on TikTok, like the accounts that shared his videos on TikTok, they are also getting booted and like censored and removed. So like the hammer came down actually even harder than last week. So anyway, and then what makes this interesting is he actually ended up moving on to Rumble within days of getting booted off of the YouTube platform, which is kind of a big deal. It's actually a great development, I would say, as a person who's into alt media. Like this guy has tens of millions of followers. If literally just 1 million of those followers go and become active on Rumble, that is a cultural game changer just by itself. Yeah, you have these, young boys and middle-aged men. Yeah, basically his target audience is, somewhere between teenagers and probably mid to late 30s, basically. If 1 million of those folks go and join Rumble and start engaging with alternative ideas and content, that is a game changer just by itself. So automatically, where this is going to land, S tier. But I just wanted to at least just kind of touch on a couple of things that I liked about this video. So he goes and puts out this farewell message or final message on the YouTubes, and it's about an hour and change long. I listened to it in passing the other day and took a couple notes. So there's some interesting stuff here that I just wanted to kind of highlight or relay. I'll kind of break it down in terms of things that I like and things that I don't like, right? And we'll move on here. So, all right, first of all, things that I liked. So first of all, he's pretty humanizing. He tells a bit about his upbringing and his childhood. I guess he grew up in Chicago, went to the UK, I guess for parts of middle school and or high school. So he kind of learned how to, kind of stand on his own 2 feet through those kind of childhood experiences and kind of taking care of business, if you would. He seems to be very penitent in this video. He doesn't apologize. That's the thing. The right would be proud of him, right? If you don't feel like you've done wrong, don't apologize, right? That's kind of the motto. But his tone is definitely apologetic, definitely apologetic, without necessarily saying I'm sorry, please forgive me, kind of thing. So given the main charge against him, which is that he's a misogynist, he says that he plans to donate millions to women's charity to basically demonstrate that he is not a misogynist. He says he's going to take a break from social media and is going to be more selective on social media content, which is a big deal. So now he's going to be giving out content exclusively on Rumble, which is a big deal from an amplification standpoint. I mean, this is going to be great for that platform. He's starting a foundation to focus on charitable acts to both genders, and he's pretty emphatic that he's not a misogynist here. He has a niece, he says, and he wants good women in society as he sits here in his kind of posh studio apartment or whatever it is. He's trying to emphasize in this video hey, I was trying to encourage both men as a whole as well as men's mental health issues, and talks about some people who have seriously suffered from that. But he says I want to expand sort of this let's say market beyond just men and also include women. So women, and making appeal to them and talking about women's mental health issues as well. So he says that around, I think, minute 50 or so here in terms of like talking about the different athletes here you see that have had mental health challenges over the years. And he would know as an athlete, right? He talks about, so I guess he moved to Romania. So he runs a shelter for dogs. He did some things. He said, like, basically he's trying to say, I'm a good guy. You know, he privately, without publicizing it, rebuilt an orphanage, I guess, in Romania, as well as ran that dog shelter. So good-hearted person, right? You would think. And then he basically calls, and these are his actual words, the next chapter of his life a redemption arc, which kind of like brought me to like, you know, Bible stories or like in the movies, right, where you have this sort of kind of comeback kind of feel. He says that his Instagram will be all about the Tate Foundation going forward. No more Bugatti posting. So if his Instagram is still up or comes back, he's like, hey, it's going to be all about Tate Foundation, which is his charity, effectively doing all this giving millions of dollars to women's charities and you know, mental health programs and such. No more Bugatti posting, he says. And he's very wealthy. He has like dozens of cars. So like that was kind of one of his things. And he basically says, look, I'm not against women. I'm just against drug users and low quality people of both genders. Right. Like regardless of their actual like, orientation or I should say gender. So that's what I liked about it. Let's talk about some stuff that I don't like. So he as a person, I had some issues with him because, so first of all, he claims to be a Christian and that he donates a bunch of money to the church. And I don't know, like, I just felt like that was like cap, as the cool kids will say today. So there's this interesting video by this guy named Ruslan, kind of breaking this down. Highly encourage you to check out his content. And he basically breaks down the claim that Andrew made in his video. And this is actually before the apology video came out, about Andrew claiming to be a Christian. And he can go into better depth than me. But my takeaway from this is, when he says he is a Christian or goes to church, he almost comes across to me to like as one of those like Roman emperors who was like, oh, how can I use this religion for my means and for my ends? Or let's say Genghis Khan, what is it in this text that I can use to subjugate people, to advance my own, conquest of the world, to maybe have, as many women as possible, right? To theologically justify, let's say, the accumulation of wealth. Like how can I make religion serve me as opposed to serving religion? So that's my takeaway in terms of what his actual position is. He seems to be a worldly man by every single possible like standard that I can come up with. I don't really view, God knows his heart, but I don't view his claim as authentic personally. It seems to be completely shallow. And he if you listen to his actual story in the Ruslan video, for example, I'm definitely not convinced. He comes across as a worldly man in every sense of the word. I don't think he understands the gospel message at all, or anything about faith, repentance, and Jesus at all, not in the least. Anyway, so he says things that I don't like as well. So, for example, he's like, "Oh, I love women. I would fight 10 men at the same time to defend a woman." At roughly like minute 31, I think that's cap. Yeah. If it was a stranger, like a stranger woman, I don't see him doing that at all. Just based upon the understanding of who he is, maybe family. He spends like the first half an hour of the video just talking about how famous he is and how everyone wants to get rich off of his name. Sure, I can see that, but he didn't have to say it like a dozen times in 30 minutes. I get it, like his name sells and gets clicks or whatever, but yeah, it feels like he was just like humble bragging right there. I got really annoyed by him saying over and over that everything that is misunderstood about him is just something getting taken out of context. So that's just like BS in my opinion. Like like you don't have to listen to a guy for an hour to kind of get where he's coming from. Those 30-second, 1 minute clips, he's communicating enough and he talks fast enough to get the gist of what he's saying. So that felt like bullshit. Sorry. I think that's just an excuse for when you say something that like the left does that. USA Today or one of these fact checking groups, right? we can hear very clearly, what someone is saying or what Joe Biden is saying, and then you have the so-called fact checkers, the gatekeepers, come and say, "Well, actually, if you listen to it in this context and how he was actually saying it here, no, we have eyes, we have ears, we're perfectly capable of processing this information, and we don't need them to contextualize it for us." So that was just more cap. I also wish he had spoken a little bit more about his career. Like transitioning from the UFC, how he got started in his business empire, and then when he started like to produce social media content, which is like his big thing now in terms of all of his like influence. He didn't really go into that. Part of the reason might be, to be honest with you, his superhero kind of origin story is very dark. He got his money in adult content and webcams for like basically nude women. As well as gambling and casinos, right? So all the vices, right? That's where he got to start at. He and his brother were doing all kinds of sin possible in order to make money, and they were very successful in that and got millions of dollars from it. But he's been implicated in things like human trafficking, kidnapping, various scams. You have the scam like the Hustlers University, which just got shut down the other week. And then he has this weird thing that Ruslan hits on called the War Room. So whoever this guy Ruslan is listening to breaks down the actual War Room detail some more. But by all intents and purposes, the War Room is basically like a cult, to be honest with you. So it has all this, like, first of all, it's like thousands and thousands of dollars, right, for this exclusive access. And, there's some weird stuff around like him being a cult leader. He has like free Mason iconography. He's making these crazy, like statements around, like basically just like manipulating people. Very, very dark, very, very shady, kind of like War Room club, I guess, to be a member of his squad here. So, anyway, very sus overall. And then a couple more just quick cap things. He says that there are no other male role models. So it's part of the reason why he thinks of himself pretty highly is that he says that there are no other male role models. And so he feels like he's doing a service to mankind through his role. Again, self-inflation and ego is what I hear here. Just because you're not famous doesn't mean that you're the only, male role model. Doesn't make you a male role model. There's plenty of silent, unsung heroes who are just regular Jack and Jills, and we'll never get the, billion plus people, reach or whatever. And there's prominent people in the public sphere. Your Jordan Peterson, I think, is thumbnailed over here to the right. You got a lot of influencers. I mean, Tim Pool, people look up to him. Ben Shapiro, people look up to him. I like Brandon Tatum. I'm a fan of Brandon Tatum. I think he's a great guy. In my opinion, he's a male role model. He's a good man and a good YouTuber, right? So like, I'm just going to call cap on that one. Thinking of himself way too highly. And then lastly is he addresses the claim that he's a sex trafficker or human trafficker, as I said earlier, at 52 minutes or so, and says that is actually why he moved to Romania. Or let me clarify, that is a theory. So the theory is he moved to Romania because the laws around sex trafficking are like more loose. And so he wanted to avoid issues by moving there. And one of the more amusing parts of the video is he basically says that is racist, which again, he's channeling like left-wing talking points to basically like defend himself here at 52 minutes. Hey, it's racist for you to say moving to Romania, was a way for me to skirt the law around human trafficking. That's so racist without actually addressing the substance of the matter, right? It's a way for him to dance and deflect without actually owning it and saying, hey, yeah, like here's actually what happened. And there's credible information that like he was pretty deeply involved in things that like that, almost like legalized pimping and the like, right? So very sus again. So yeah, may God have mercy on his soul. So moving on, I'm going to move this up obviously to an S tier. Huge development. When you have the young folks gravitating towards this type of content, like it's something to watch for sure. So yeah, and I already talked about this one, right? They promise they can make jokes without being destroyed and annihilated. This is going to be huge, right? Both for the culture of like censorship, as well as like Rumble and like what is being done to combat that culture of censorship. Okay, so next up we have kind of a narrative shift. So the administration, if you would, is basically claiming that the Trump administration was pressuring the FDA to basically authorize and approve COVID treatments, like in an accelerated timeline. So that's kind of interesting, right? There's been a narrative shift. I think what's happening in the culture right now is like the left is starting to acknowledge that maybe not all vaccines are 100% safe and effective all the time in every way to everyone. And I think they're almost trying to get ahead of like the negative PR that has come out, is coming out, and will come out, and kind of almost shift the narrative to actually blame that on Trump. And this comes as, Dr. Fauci, the one and only, resigned in disgrace the other day. So that's kind of a major development. He's going to be exiting by the end of this year, but apparently he may still need to do some congressional kind of hearings or be called in. So we'll see how that goes. Someone who I respect, Novak Djokovic, arguably the best tennis player in the world right now, and has been for some time. He basically said, I'm not going to play at the U.S. Open, and because they require me to get vaccinated, and I won't. So that's interesting. Very much, taking a stance here, and holding the line, if you would. And then mysteriously, the top seed from, I think, Bulgaria, Grigor Dimitrov, retired from his match in the second set during the U.S. Open, complaining of, I think it was shortness of breath and chest pain and dizziness and things of that nature. He just couldn't go on after about 25 minutes of playing. Sure, it has nothing to do with the vaccine, which is safe and effective, of course. So this one I'm going to move to A tier. Just this whole like narrative around the vaccine kind of changing. And we'll kind of see how it goes. I think people are getting exhausted with this, right? They want this to be over. They thought it would be over, especially with Biden coming in and getting elected, like better days ahead kind of thing. That hasn't really transpired, and people are trying to move on. Like, what is the new thing? Is it monkeypox? Is it something else? Or is it just like, let's just go back to normal? Like, what's going to happen? But people are getting agitated by this. So we'll see. And then next up, I thought it was important to at least hit on this whole like banning of gas-powered vehicles topic. So California has moved to ban the sale of new gas vehicles by 2035. So like 13 years from now. And you have to run on like zero emission vehicles. And what was crazy is that in pretty short order, he says like 17 other states have already followed California's lead and adopted its own tailpipe emission standards, which are stricter than the government. So this is a big deal, right? You have this like, morphed and mutated version of the Green New Deal that just passed recently, which was called the Inflation Reduction Act. Apparently there's a bunch of money in there specifically to move forward on these kind of green initiatives. And it's actually this move by California and other states seems to be in line with that shift, right? So we'll see what happens in the years to come. But you have, Washington moving to zero emissions, Oregon moving to zero emissions, Massachusetts, New York, right? Kathy Hochul signing a bill targeting 100% of the cars in that state to be zero emission by 2035. So this is going to be a really interesting thing to watch and kind of see. And then they're moving on to medium and heavy duty vehicles. It almost reminds me of like the zero COVID strategy. So there came a time in this country, where it's like, hey, we're never going to like have absolutely zero COVID. I think people either explicitly or implicitly like learn to live with it. And this is kind of what I feel like what they're doing with these zero emissions. Zero emissions is a pipe dream. As long as you have human beings, you're going to have emissions. It's a pipe dream. It's a fantasy. It's not a reality. It's not grounded in any facts. But they're going to keep chasing it. And it'll be interesting to kind of see what impact that has on the economy and on people's quality of life. The indication seems to be it will be fairly bad, but we shall see how things develop. Moving this one to an A tier. something to continue to watch and monitor. All right. And then last up, we got to talk about these like cultural silos happening right now. So there's a lot of new like media and content happening in the culture war. Trailers, movies, documentaries, music. And so I wanted to kind of just touch on a couple as we close here. So there's a film put out by, I believe, Breitbart called My Son Hunter. And apparently it got about 1.2 million views in like 2 days. So that's a lot. Seems to be really, really doing well. And in addition to that, you have the Uncle Tom 2 that just came out. I haven't seen it because I'm cheap and stubborn, and it takes me a while to muster the desire to spend $20-something on a movie. Like I wouldn't like. You need to be like the best movie ever made for me to do that. But anyway, I'll probably get around to it soon. But I did watch Uncle Tom 1, and it was quite good. So this just came out, and continuing on the theme of like, what does it mean to be a black conservative? And what are the nuances in that? So we'll kind of see how that transpires and how well the video does. It must have did pretty well for the first one must have did pretty well for the second one to come out. So we'll see. And then the favorite Beanie Man, Tim Pool, he came out with a song, Only Ever Wanted, this past week, and he got a lot of hate for it as he complained on the internet. But he also got some love for it, and apparently he got enough love to hit number 2 on iTunes charts, selling it for a very cheap 69 cents. So good for him. The guy's trying to really impact culture, and this is the kind of stuff we need, right? This is the cultural ammunition we need to like influence normies, because it's all about the normies. And then lastly here, just from a cultural standpoint, is this whole TPUSA. So I guess Jack Posobiec and or TPUSA, and that's Turning Point USA, is like a conservative organization. They basically are putting out a documentary called The Great Global Reset, I think it's called. Yeah, The Great Global Reset. And then, Jack is complaining because it got kind of throttled by Twitter, right? Who kind of like give a little bit of this like disclaimer stuff and kind of limiting its reach a little bit. But Jack's been crushing it in the interwebs and kind of influence spheres. So it should be interesting to see this documentary when it comes out. I think it's going to be released, I could be wrong, like mid-September along with the TPUSA conference, because the TPUSA is coming out in mid-September. Yeah, here it is, September 16th through 17th in Phoenix, Arizona. So I'm assuming that the documentary will come out kind of concurrent with that. Should be great to watch. When this whole pandemic situation started, people were saying, "Oh, great reset, conspiracy theory," and here are the dozens of fact checkers to tell us why we're wrong. And now it's like pretty much established, as true. All right, that's all I have for today. Appreciate the time and thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to today's rundown. If you liked what you heard, please comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.